Federation executives and representatives, distinguished observers and friends of sport, media representatives of the various media houses, ladies and gentlemen, all protocols observed. Good morning again. Let me welcome you to the Alisa Hotel and to the 2017 Ghana Olympic Committee Elective Congress. It's indeed a pleasure to see you all again. In 2013, when we got the opportunity to host our first Congress, I made the pledge that we'd do everything in our power to deliver an open, transparent election at the end of our tenure. Quite a lot has gone on over the last few weeks, but it's my prayer that at the end of the day, when history is written, it will be acknowledged that the structures that were put in place allowed a transparent and fair conduct of the 2017 elections. In this regard, I would like to particularly thank the chairs and members of the Election Commission and the Disciplinary Grievance and Dispute Resolution Subcommittee, who worked assiduously in these last few days to deliver decisions and verdicts that we must all respect and commend them for. Thank you very much. That would be in order. That would be in order. Our Constitution gave us until April 30th, 2017 to conduct the Congress, in main because it was imperative that we properly close and audit the accounts for that very important year in the quadrennial, which is the Olympic year, 2016. Today, we will present the accounts and audited report for 2016, as well as those for the preceding year, 2015, as our attempt to present that earlier account was frustrated by a court injunction. I trust that all of the delegates have received both of these accounts, together with the requisite papers for today's assembly. But before we get to the important business of rendering account, it is apropos that I present a report of our tenure, and I will try to do so now. Cognizant of the larger reason that we have gathered here today, I will try to deliver this address touching on key points and hopefully otherwise demonstrating a brevity that I am generally not known for. I fully appreciate why we are assembled here today, and contrary to what many have said, I have myself been very eager to get to these elections for many, many months. We came into the leadership of the Olympic family at the end of 2011, and only a few months before the 2012 Olympics. We spent the time leading up to 2012 catching up with the local organizing committee of the London Games, catching up with our responsibilities vis-à-vis IOC, and with setting up and figuring out how to collaborate with the Ministry and the National Sports Authority to get set for the London Olympics. With the brief few months we had, that was virtually an impossible task, and it was only through God that we were able to even make it happen. Indeed, it was the brevity of time and the complications which that brought that led to the request to extend the tenure of the Ghana Olympic Committee by 1 year, so that the next GOC would take over now, today, rather than at the end of 2015, which it otherwise would have, and which would then have left that new body less than a year to prepare for the 2016 Olympics. After London, we had to tackle the IOC request that we reform the Constitution to prevent the nature of the election we had in 2009 and 2011. At the same time, we were unable to convene as a Congress because we were under a court injunction as the results of the 2011 election had been hit with a legal challenge by Ghana Cycling. Thankfully, that case was disposed of near the middle of 2013, which paved the way for us to hold our first Congress, the one I alluded to earlier, on 2nd November 2013. It was at that Congress that we ratified the Constitution we now have, and we received IOC's approval on that in 2014. Meanwhile, we formed numerous committees to tackle the various tasks associated with running the Ghana Olympic Committee. For example, finance, fundraising, We also put into place a committee to work on the Olymp Africa project and a host of other communities. We also spent time trying to figure out how to provide funding for funding of various forms to the federations for coaching courses, seminars, and other kinds of support. I am happy to inform you that after about 3 years of uncompromising negotiations with Olymp Africa, who had cut ties with our Amasaman project before our tenure, they have, towards the end of last year, given us the green light to resume that partnership. They have asked to see our plans, and that project is happily back on the board. The next milestone was the 2014 Commonwealth Games in Glasgow, and we managed to deliver Ghana's participation, albeit at considerable cost to the Ghana Olympic Committee. Our principal partner, the government, appealed to us to contract a loan for 1 million cedis to pre-finance the accommodation and feeding for the 3-week pre-games training camp in Ayrshire, Scotland, and also for the prepayment of the tracksuits and other kit. The hotel that we were negotiating with was adamant that if it did not receive full payment way ahead of the arrival of the team to Ayrshire, it would not be able to hold a space for Ghana, as other countries who were also on their way to Glasgow were clamoring for space for training. Indeed, I understand that the hotel did not want to lose, because if they held it for us and perchance we did not show up, then they would have lost that opportunity to make quite a bit of money. Similarly, because the tracksuits, etc., had to be peculiarly embossed with Ghana identifiers, and we saw some of those tracksuits in some of the earlier slides that you're seeing, the Italian manufacturers, despite giving us a negotiated 50% discount, were unwilling to take the risk of manufacturing kit with Ghana embossed all over, and that nobody else would buy if we did not show up to pay for them after the fact. And so they demanded prepayment. It was imperative that these things be paid for weeks before departure for Ayrshire, which was itself 3 weeks plus before the Commonwealth Games. We were assured by government that since the funding for games were always released before or right around the time that the teams depart, we would get this money before the actual start of the games. So, after a board decision, we went ahead to contract that loan, anticipating that it would cost the GOC just about 3 to 4 months of interest, as we were willing to absorb that interest that would accrue until we were repaid just before the games. We duly dispensed of the responsibility that we had been asked to take up, but unfortunately, the repayment from government remains outstanding. Nevertheless, Ghana presented almost 100-strong contingent of athletes to the Games. And despite the issues that arose from not getting participation equipment, cycles, gloves, and so on, in time for the Games, the contingent was kitted beautifully and abundantly during the Games. Ghanaian athletes paraded around during the Games with multiple sets of clothing that had Ghana easily identified in the village. 2015 brought the African Games, which we were not responsible for. By the time we held our Congress in 2015, we had received ratification of our constitution from IOC and can say it was fully enforced at that point. Preparation towards 2016 began feverishly, although seriously handicapped by the new funding regime we as a country were now in. You see, by the beginning of 2014, it had become very evident that government was no longer in the business of supporting federations in the way that it had been before, even to the extent that many of them had missed their Olympic qualifiers for 2012. When this first happened in 2012, all of us, including the staff in the ministry and the National Sports Authority, thought that it was a temporary blip, a result of a financial hiccup, and that government would soon resume resourcing federations. So in the first instance, federations were actually encouraged to borrow to attend events like qualifiers, so that repayment would be made later when government resources came in. those repayments never came. And by 2014, it was clear to all and sundry that this was actually a new regime that we were in, a totally different era. For those of us at the GOC, it meant a redefinition of our role as federations for whom we had always supported in our own small way, but had never been responsible for funding, now saw us as their principal source of funding. Although GOC had always expected itself to seek funding for its activities, such as Olympic Day and so on, the game was different now, as up to 40 federations now look to us for sustenance. We have said over and over again that a source of funding that we draw on to support federations is, at this point, an $85,000 per annum pot of money. And we spent the last 3 years figuring out ways of disbursing that $85,000 to the multitude of federations that needed to attend qualifiers. So our job now has become how to find ways of leveraging substantial and sustainable funding. Substantial because there are so many federations that need support, and sustainable because it's clearly something that's going to have to be done every year going forward. But I'm happy to say that we can now argue that this is about to happen. First, we have signed an agreement with the Korean Consortium to deliver a lottery that will fund the quote-unquote lesser-known sports. They will invest 10 million of their own money, and the yield from the lottery will go to the lesser-funded sports. The Honorable Minister of Sports, who had to leave, is pleased with what he has seen and will be collaborating with us to effect that in the nearest possible time. God willing, by the end of this year, that should be in effect. We have also signed an agreement with a sponsor who will support preparation towards Tokyo 2020, and not in 2020, but beginning in the middle of this year, mid-2017. The magnitude of the funding that they have guaranteed to provide in just the first year alone is almost 1.7 million euros. That is just for the first year. And so hopefully we're entering a regime where Ghanaian sportsmen and women will now have the opportunity to prepare and do so properly years ahead of the games, instead of just a few weeks prior, as has been our style. As a Ghana Olympic Committee, that is how we have responded to the implicit change in our mandate. We will bring to fruition other opportunities to increase the funding pool, and with regard to sustainability, the agreement with the sponsor I just mentioned has a clause in it in which they want the right of first refusal after the 2020 Olympic Games. In other words, they are contracting us to give them a chance to consider remaining with us after Tokyo 2020 before we consider any other one else. It tells you that the brand we are developing is already considered attractive to sponsors. Returning to our preparation for Rio 2016, we received very attractive funding support leading up to the Games. Two quite large sponsorships we got came from GNPC, who supported GOC to the tune of $120,000 when they picked up the cost of the plane tickets for the athletes and contingent. And also Cocoa for Ghana, our headline sponsor, who gave the GOC $171,580. Today, I wanted to give you the exact amounts, as so many other figures have been bandied around. I have the contract with me here so that those who want to inspect it can verify for themselves. There were a number of other supporters who gave both in cash and in kind to enable us present a well-catered for team in Rio. Government also worked with the corporate sector to deliver the allowances for the athletes. Rio 2016 also brought hope of a turnaround in our Olympic athlete numbers. After taking only single-digit numbers of athletes to the 2012 and 2008 editions of the Olympics, we actually had 16 athletes in Rio, and quite a handful of others who came so close but just barely missed qualifying. The other beautiful thing is that the average age of the athletes was quite low, meaning that they have a bright future ahead of them. And particularly, as we enter this new regime, where they will be able to start proper preparations years ahead, instead of just a few weeks before, we should expect that they will perform better than Ghanaian athletes of the last decade or two. For this rebirth in athlete numbers and quality, I must commend the federations, and particularly because they have been able to do this in the very difficult funding climate that I described. But now we're in 2017 and at our elective Congress. On behalf of all my colleagues, that is, those who served with me on the 18-member strong board, very distinguished men and women of Ghana that I served with, I would like to say a big thank you to everyone for the opportunity given us to be the custodians of the Olympic family in this term that we have served. Let me beg your indulgence to make a few personal comments as your president. It certainly has not been an easy road, and there have been numerous challenges. Only one of which was the funding one that I have spent some time dilating on. Since 2014, we have been accused of so many improprieties, including theft, corruption, immorality, lack of transparency, but it's all good. Through all of this, we have tried to keep our composure and stay focused on the job, particularly because the job changed in the unpredictable way that I described earlier. I remained silent and reluctant to engage with media for all those years for three main reasons. First, after we came through as a collective between what we went through between 2009 and 2011, I wanted to ensure that we retained some modicum of dignity to repair the damage that had been done between 2009 and 2011, and to try to preserve the dignity of the Olympic brand. Thus, even though the insults and accusations came fast and furious, my thinking was that responding would only have served to provoke further retaliation. In other words, doing so would have escalated things. My second reason for being quiet is not unrelated. How do we embroil the GOC in that kind of carnage and then turn to a sponsor and expect them to attach their reputation, their brand, and even their money to a raging forest fire? That would be too risky for them. And so I thought it was proper, prudent, to sit still and just take whatever was thrown at us. Third, as the leader of the Olympic family in Ghana, I thought it was an opportunity, what we went through, to teach the youth, including my own teenage daughters, how to be upstanding in the face of that kind of duress. My worst moment in sport occurred during this 5-year term. Imagine your teenage daughter coming back from school, walking through the door, not even greeting you, and then just blurting out the question, "Daddy, is it true that you stole money?" Clearly, she had been teased in school by other children who had probably heard their parents discussing it or who had heard it on the radio. So in standing still through the storm, I was hoping that my daughters and other youth of Ghana would learn that one can carry themselves above the fray and that one can rely on God to take them through even the ugliest of adversities. My thinking, my position, is that I'm very thankful for the adversity, as it provided the opportunity to provide that kind of an example of a leader, of one who takes hits, perhaps below the belt, and continues to demonstrate the character that God would have us display. My favorite question is when people approach me, church, parties, in town, and ask me, how do you continue to go on with all of this fire that is thrown at you? It tells me that at least they understand that this is one way to respond. As leaders, decisions to support communities, individuals, and federations should not be dependent on whether those people like you or whether they lie about you. Those decisions should be dependent on the need of the federations and the young men and women of Ghana who play those sports. So we continue to support federations, regardless of their positions to the GOC. The long and short of it is that the fire I've had to walk through has added appreciably to my maturation process as a human being. So I'm thankful for the opportunity you all have given me, and I hope that 10 years down the road, yes, when we all look back, we will appreciate that not so young Ghanaian man, yes, despite everything you heard, I am Ghanaian, and proudly so. This is a country that I love and that I would die for if I have to. It's my Ghanaian passport. That not so young Ghanaian man did the best he could in the same way that he did when he put life and limb at risk to compete for Ghana as an athlete. Even as I have come to the end of my term, permit me to be presumptuous enough to give advice. And I must acknowledge that this is an enduring message that I have heard our Vice Chancellor at the University of Ghana deliver to students at the University of Ghana. He always tells them that they must always think about protecting their university's name and brand, because they have to realize that the value of the certificate they hold when they leave the university is so very dependent on what the world thinks about the university whose certificate they hold. So if they contribute to dragging down the name of the university because they want to satisfy an immediate personal need, they should factor in mind what that does to the value of the certificate that they hold. In the same way, we should do the same as we consider denigrating the Olympic family that we belong to. I will end here by saying thank you again for the opportunity to serve. God bless you. God bless the GOC. And God bless our homeland, Ghana.